12 November 1692. The abandoned abbey in the highlands of Burgundy stands like a ribcage against the fog, its gull rope swaying, though the cloister air is windless, and the boards across the well look not like repair, but like a mouth stopped with wood. I came up the mule track as the vines below went brittle and brown, and the mountains smelled of iron and wet leaves. I came to learn the rule and exchange the coarse voice of my late father for the clean grammar of prayer. My name is Mathieu of Alterne, a novice since Michaelmas, and I was received at the wicket by no one at all. The wicket stood ajar. The candle stump had sunk into a dish of tallow like a drowned eye, and the porter's stool was warm. How could it be warm? Well, the porter himself had vanished into a footstep that did not finish. The first thing they made me do was sign the prefect's ledger in the guest hall, and it was then I saw the 3 names scraped thin with pumice until the parchment shone. 2 lines erased to pale scars, and the bishop's red seal pressed down over a clause whose words still raised a blister beneath the wax. These records are to be withheld from the public by order of the ordinary. No copy is to be made. A margin hand had written, the letters tight as clenched teeth. On the table lay a folded cutting from a Lyon paper, brittle with damp. It reported wolves in the passes, a missing pilgrim, and rumors of soldiers who never reached the winter quarters at Dijon. And underneath, invisible until I tilted it to the hearthlight, another ink had bled a sentence from the backside. 5 went into matins, fewer than half walked out of the choir. Prior Giron found me studying the paper, and closed my hand around it with a pressure that felt almost tender and almost like a warning. "You will keep silence in the cloister," he said, though I had not spoken, and then, softer, "You will not go down." He did not say down where. He placed me in a novice's cell on the north walk. The slit of a window showed black firs, a pale wash of fog, and the darker wedge where the mountain's cleft dropped like a throat. Someone had left a devotional book on the ledge, its board warped by cold. When I opened it, the plate of Saint Denis carrying his head fell out, and something had been written on the back in a careful, shaking hand. "Brother, if this reaches you, do not answer the night when it answers itself." The page was stained in one corner a brown that was older than wine. At the 2nd hour, though there is no second bell at St. Brune, I learned that quickly. The bell tolled again, muffled, as if rung under a blanket. At the on, the senior novice moved past me in the corridor like a man counting without numbers, and when I whispered, "Brother," the bell rang twice. He looked not at me, but through me, and his lips shaped the word hush without sound. In the nave, the stone was the kind of cold that lives inside bone. The first plain chant rose thin and clear, 6 voices following the weight line of the mode. If you have never been inside a church when night is a presence rather than a time, you cannot know how sound can hollow a tunnel under your feet and invite you to step. Midway through De Profundis, the air thickened, as if someone had set a hand on the lower notes and pressed, and another answer came, not Latin, not speech, more like a mouth that had never learned to open, more like a shape taught to fit itself around our calling. The elders did not startle. They slowed a fraction, a practiced veering as a sailor turns his bow into a wave, and the wave passed, or seemed to pass, and we bowed and filed out, and no word like fear crossed anyone's mouth. After prime, the refectory tables were dressed with a white cloth. As for a feast, we ate barley soup, and a cheese full of holes as if the air had been granted a body. Brother Adelard served me too much and then deliberately spilled a silver thread of soup back into the pot as if measuring, as if feeding something that waited at the bottom. "The Abbey has patrons older than our order," he said in a voice like a Chiant stone. "They are shy. You must not greet them first." In the lavatorium, the water shivered, though no hand touched it. My refections seemed to belong to someone who had already learned what I had not.
In the scriptorium, beneath a bundle of sermons tied pat, I found the thing I did not know I had been sent to find. A letter with a broken seal addressed to the Commissioner for Ecclesiastical Reports to Joan, dated the very day I arrived. The script wandered as if the writer had walked while writing. Your Excellency, it began, for the sake of souls, I report a practice in the night. After matins, a second bell is rung, low, and the brethren go not to dormitory nor refectory, but to the crypt. I have been told the mountain keeps the fathers for us, this is their phrase, and that to refuse the fathers is to refuse grace. The novices are not to know, 3 are missing. The cellarer says sickness sent them home. The porter says the pass is closed by wolves. The sacristan says he saw Brother Abelard carry 2 cups to the lowest stair. I heard the cups touch stone after a hymn sung with the mouth shut. It was signed only R, and beneath the initial a block-shaped lip of fish. I slid the page back when I found it, and told myself obedience is a gateway to mercy. I told myself the rule is a lamp for the feet, yet the lamp threw light only as far as the first step, and beyond that the night held its breath and waited. In the garth, a fox had prutted 5 neat odals into the frost, then stopped, as if lifted. By the bordered well, a wheel-rut had impressed the earth with 2 parallel lines that had andied at the boards and did not return. The rope moved without a draught. Noon brought no noon. The mountain wore its fog like wet wool, the sky the colour of butter scraped thin. At the end hounded the calefactory, a tune without notes, the rhythm of someone knitting with cold hands. An old monk smoking dead high explained, without looking up, that the bees had gone to serve the patrons, and his mouth made a shape like a smile, and like a prayer, and like neither. At vespers, a rook struck the window slit with the grave rap of a black glove. At Compline, my palate was as hard as instruction, and when I drew the blanket in my chin, I felt grit, as if a page had been cut to dust on it. I read instead the leaf I had hid in my sleeve, the one from the devotional, whose reverse held a second line, written later, as if the nib had been starved. They will speak to you in a voice you long for. It will not be theirs. Before sleep I counted the brethren. A courtesy the mind pays to fear. There were 21 souls by my reckoning, including myself. At the candlelit procession of St. Priest, I would later count only 17. You will say numbers a poor defense. I say there are monk's fence against weather. In the night I woke to the second bell again, the sound of metal heard through cloth, and to footsteps passing my door, not many, not few, only rung by 1 or 2, as if some could not decide itself. I did not follow, not that night. I felt the Abbey beneath me like a ship, felt the keel turned towards something deep. The mountain has a sound when frost tightens the rock, a slow crack like a door never meant to open. I heard it and thought of the sentence in the letter. The mountain keeps fathers for us. In the morning, the prior spoke to us of silence and stability. He spoke of the fathers of the desert and of discernment. He spoke of obedience as a narrowing that leads to a freedom broad as sky. While he spoke, I noticed a ring of base shavings in the calefactory stones, and under them a circle burned faint and black, as if someone had traced the shape of a cup, and then drunk the coal. The guest on the lectern of the heart had taken my name clean. Now the ink puckered up at the edges, as if something below insisted it had been written there before and must be read first. I will tell you my reasons for writing, for you will ask. I write because the rule binds tongues but not truth. I write because writing binds what otherwise bind the mouth. And I write because if you are reading this where doors lock, and lamps burn by your own will, you live in a mercy I must measure in candle spubs. And I write because found things find their finder. Behind the crucifix in the chapter house, I found a fragment of a map pricked with a pinhole path from the choir to a mark that was not a chapel, not a sacristy, but a black space under the cloister walk. A hand had labelled in a script older than ours, older than Rome, hollow of the grandfathers. The ink had been made with soot and something sweet. I could smell it even after years. "Do not go down," the prior said, and the word "down" began to grow roots in my sleep. Somewhere a child's lap passed through the nave and daylight, though we have no children. Somewhere a small shape moved along the cornice and left no dust. Somewhere the bell did not need a hand. If a place could learn your name, this place learned mine quickly. When I passed the bordered well at dusk, something spoke my name in my father's voice. Clear, tired, kind, the exact baritone that said, once in our kitchen, "Matu, leave the door open, let the night breathe." And I know what the Leith had warned, and I know what obedience demands, and still I stood. Then the rope shook, every second bell answered from under the placket of stone, and the night answered itself.
The abbey stood above the valley like a block of grief carved out of the mountain, its walls mottled with lichen that looked like faded script no one could read anymore. And every morning the fog rolled against it as if the world itself wished to erase it. Inside, life followed a rhythm so rigid it could almost convince you that order was safety. Prime at dawn, work in the fields or scriptorium, sext, the thin meal of barley bread, then labor again until the heavy light drained from the sky and Vespers called us back. To an outsider, this would look like the quiet perfection of monastic rule, yet beneath every act was a weight, as if each motion were a cover placed carefully over something one must not see. The older monks had a particular way of moving, half gliding, their eyes lowered, lips working on words I could not hear. I began to notice that their mouths sometimes moved even when no office was scheduled, as though they carried a private liturgy that had nothing to do with Rome. In the dormitory, my straw mattress smelled faintly of smoke, though no fire had been lit. Once I reached into the stuffing and touched something smooth and round like a bead, only to find a small carved token shaped like a human ear. Meals were silent, but silence is not emptiness. There were coughs that never finished, spoons scraping bowls in rhythms too deliberate, and once a low hum that stopped when I raised my head, leaving Brother Etienne staring at me with eyes that seemed to ask why I had broken the unspoken pact. The refectory itself was hung with faded tapestries of saints, but the colors had run until every martyr looked as if he were bleeding anew, and in the candlelight the threads seemed to twitch with a pulse. Beyond the cloister, fields lay thin under the hard sky, the soil gray with exhaustion. Only the herb garden seemed alive, sprouting sage and rue and twisted, woody shapes that perfumed the air with a bitterness so sharp it made me light-headed. In the village below, the peasants spoke of St. Brendan's Abbey with a mix of awe and avoidance. Some crossed themselves when I passed, others spat into the dirt, muttering of tolling bells that came at hours no man should be awake. At night the stones themselves held sound. A cough in one cell echoed like it had traveled through a long throat beneath the floor, and the wind at the windows often rose to the pitch of chanting. The library, meant to be the heart of knowledge, smelled of iron and mildew. Its shelves sagged under manuscripts, many in languages I could not read, bound in skins cracked with age, their margins filled with sketches of circles, eyes, and branching trees like veins. It was here I saw Brother Abelard trace his finger along a page, whispering under his breath. When he noticed me, he smiled as though to reassure, but the smile was too late, arriving after the eyes had already finished speaking to something I could not see. Even the smallest things carried weight. The bees in the apiary flew in patterns too neat, small spirals that folded back on themselves. The livestock were gaunt, their eyes rolling whites at shadows. The air in the cloister garden often carried the faint smell of wax, though no candles had been burned there.
Days grew colder, the fog thickened, and the mountain silence became less a lack of sound than a presence pressing on the ears. Among the novices, talk was sparse, but I learned pieces. One had heard footsteps pacing in the old chapter house, though its door was barred. Another had seen Prior Gerard in the cemetery, standing among the graves at midnight, hands clasped, but lips motionless, as if waiting for a reply. I told myself these were only tests of obedience, strange customs rooted in forgotten centuries. But each detail stitched a larger pattern, a life where the rule of Saint Benedict was observed not to honor God, but to veil something that lived deeper than rule or prayer. The Abbey was a stone lung, and all of us were its breath.
It began with the smallest intrusions, things so slight that a man of reason might shrug them off. Yet in their repetition they became a chain that tightened night by night. The hens in the Abbey yard stopped laying, and when Brother Martin slit one open to see if sickness festered within, he found the yolks shriveled to black stones, hard enough to clink against his knife. Cats from the village, once bold enough to hunt in the granary, stopped coming altogether, though one morning a novice discovered a neat go of tails laid across the cloister walk, as if arranged for counting. In choir, during the long psalms of matins, I began to hear a second thread in the chant, too soft to be named a voice, but sharp enough to tug at the ear, like a child humming behind a door. Once, when I dared to glance up, I thought I saw the lips of the older monks shaping words that were not the psalm at all, their faces oddly slack, eyes hooded, yet their mouths twitching in rhythms that did not match the music the rest of us sang. In my cell, the candle flame leaned, though there was no draught, and the wax ran in straight ridges, as if guided by a careful hand. At night, footsteps wandered beyond the cloister, light as if children played, but the Abbey holds no children. Still, I heard giggles vanish into the stone, and twice I woke to find a pebble placed neatly at my door, the same pale color as the mountain's interior rock, damp as though freshly broken. Brother Etienne, pale and silent, warned me once by simply placing his finger across his lips and pointing to the flagged floor beneath our feet. Then he walked away, shoulders stiff, as though terrified of having already said too much. The livestock in the stable grew restless, their eyes always fixed toward the trap door leading down to the storage vaults. One goat broke its neck against the stall boards in a frenzy after a night when the second bell tolled again, muffled under stone. When I asked the cellarer about the trapdoor, he pressed his hand over mine so tightly I thought the bones would break, whispering only, "That way is not for novices." In the scriptorium, I opened a volume of sermons, and between its pages slipped scrap, ink faded to rust. "They come first to the children and the dumb beasts. The wise are visited only after." I dared not ask who wrote it, though I felt the letters burn my fingers long after I dropped it back. Some nights the chanting from the nave continued after compline, though no office was scheduled. Lying awake, I could hear a chorus rise beneath the floorboards, a sound more vibration than song, too deep for human throats, rattling the teeth in my skull until my gums ached. I tried to speak of it to Brother Abelhard, who was mild with the politeness of a man who has already dismissed you, and replied, "It is a blessing, young one, to hear the fathers in prayer. You should envy it."
The word envy struck me harder than the sound itself. What manner of prayer demanded envy? The warnings grew closer. Brother Martin, who had cut open the black-yoked hen, vanished one dawn between prime and work in the garden. His tools lay in neat order at the soil's edge, but his sandals were found later on the boards over the well, damp and heavy with mud from no place we knew. The novices whispered of wolves, though no wolf tracks were ever seen, only the same small prints, like a child's hand pressed into frost, leading to the trapdoor in the storage vault and ending there. Every day I told myself it was imagination, an overwrought soul too eager for significance, yet every night the Abbey whispered back with proof. The walls carried murmurs when no one spoke. Shadows clung where no flame burned, and the stone itself seemed to pulse like the slow beat of some enormous heart below.
The warnings soon hardened into events no one could deny, though denial was exactly what the Abbey demanded. First was Brother Martin, whose sandals had been found sodden on the boards of the well. Then 2 novices vanished within a week, their pallets left neatly made, their psalters resting on the shelf, the pages turned to exactly the same psalm. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Prior Giraud announced that both had been recalled to their families, though no mule tracks scarred the road, and when I dared to ask the porter, he replied with eyes glazed as if reading from a script, "The road is closed, wolves." Yet one dawn I saw him return from that very road, robe hem crusted with frost, carrying under his cloak something that dripped steadily onto the stones. I began to search in secret, my fear transfigured into a compulsion to know. In the library, behind a stack of Roman homilies, I discovered a sheaf of journals bound in rough leather, their pages crackling with damp. They bore the hand of Brother Raymond, a monk long dead according to the necrology. Yet the ink was not ancient, still sharp enough to stain my fingers. His entries described rites to honor the ancestors who guard the mountain, and instructions for chants that twisted Latin prayers into something unrecognizable. Pater Noster fractured into syllables repeated until the words themselves lost meaning and became pure rhythm. One entry chilled me more than the rest. The fathers demand youth, for their own flesh is thin. They take the song of the young and return it as wisdom. We tell the novices they have gone home. It is a mercy not to let them choose. Each page was dated with precision, yet some bore years far beyond the present, 1705, 1722, though Raymond had died in 1648, his name inscribed on the Abbey's own memorial board. The implication crawled into my bones. Someone still wrote under his name, or time itself had been bent by the Abbey's hand. I sought allies among the younger brothers, but silence had wormed too deep. Etienne avoided me, his face drawn, his lips sometimes moving to repeat words he would not share. When I grasped his sleeve one evening after Compline, begging him to speak plainly, he whispered only, "Do not let them teach you the second creed." Then he tore away, leaving me with the stench of cold wax and fear. The livestock dwindled. Goats bled in their pens. The hives stood silent, their bees gone without trace. And with each loss the monks gathered at night, filing wordlessly down the stair behind the trap-door I was forbidden to touch. I counted them. 17 entered, 15 returned. They came back pale, lips darkened,
eyes ringed with hollows as if each had left something behind. Driven by dread, I pried up the trapdoor one dawn when the Abbey still slept. Stale air rolled out, thick with the smell of stone and old fat. The stair coiled downward, the walls etched with circles like those in Raymond's journals, grooves worn smooth by centuries of touch. I did not descend, not fully, for the sound met me halfway, chanting that was not a choir, but a weaving of many mouths, some higher, some impossibly low, all folding together into a pattern that made the torch shake in my hand. I fled, but the air followed me up like a living draught, humming against my skin. From then on, fear was no longer private. The Abbey itself began to reveal its hand. The novices no longer whispered, but cried openly in the night. One beat his head against the wall until blood streaked the plaster, begging to be released, not from vows, but from the call beneath. The prior spoke to us in chapter with a voice mild and steady, saying these were only trials sent by the devil. But his hands trembled when he blessed the air, and I thought I saw black stains on his palms, like ink soaked too deep to wash. And then came the night when Brother Etienne himself disappeared. He had sat beside me at supper, face gaunt, eyes downcast, yet at Martin's his place was empty, his psalter closed, his sandals left neatly under the dormitory bench. I waited for an announcement that he had been sent home, but none came. The monks sang the office with their usual steadiness, but beneath it ran another sound, soft and certain, as if a new voice had joined the choir, one I recognized, one I had heard only hours before in Etienne's throat. That night I dreamed of him standing at the bottom of the trapdoor stair, lips moving without words, hand raised not in blessing but in beckoning.
The night of revelation came not with thunder or storm, but with a silence so absolute it crushed the breath from the lungs. Even the mountains seemed to hold still, as though listening for its own echo. Driven by terror and a conviction that ignorance itself had become a sin, I forced the trapdoor open after Compline, the iron hinges shrieking like an animal betrayed. Torch in hand, I descended into the bowels of the Abbey. The air grew warmer, wet, carrying the stench of old wax and marrow. Walls glistened with moisture that was not holy water. Symbols carved into the stone flared in the torchlight, spirals, circles, lines converging to eyes, exactly like those in Raymond's journals, though some pulsed faintly, as if inked not in pigment, but in something still alive. The stair gave way to a corridor ribbed like the inside of a beast's throat, ending in a cavern vast enough to house the Abbey above it. There, beneath arches of natural rock, stood altars fashioned from piled skulls mortared with wax, each bearing a guttering candle that hissed, though no draught stirred. Monks gathered round a central pit, their hoods thrown back, their faces slack with devotion and something deeper, something surrendered. The chanted words that bent the Latin into syllables older than speech, phrases that pulled at the ear until meaning itself unraveled. In the pit below lay bones, not arranged but woven, ribs crisscrossed like lattice, femur stacked in spirals, skulls gazing upward with sockets packed full of herbs and coins. At the center rose a pillar of stone streaked black with centuries of soot, and on its surface I saw names carved, some crossed out, some still raw, as if etched that very day. Names of novices, villagers, even dates not yet reached. Among them was mine, Matthew of Autun, letters damp as if freshly cut.
The chanting swelled and a figure turned toward me. Prior Giraud, his eyes glowing with the reflection of flames, hands lifted in supplication, not to God, but to the dark pillar itself. "The fathers keep us," he intoned, voice cracked with ecstasy. "They teach us through fear. They bind us through blood." Around him, monks swayed, their mouths opening wider than natural, as if hinges had been cut deeper into the jaw, their voices layering into a sound, both hymn and howl. I stumbled backward, and my torchlight fell on an open codex resting on a stone plinth. Its pages bore drawings. Children offered at altars, monks slicing palms to feed drops of blood into bowls. Lines of scripture rewritten with letters twisted backwards into glyphs that resembled trees of bone. Margins were filled with nodes in Raymond's hand, claiming that the cult predated Rome, that the abbey had been built atop a hollow where the grandfathers dwelt. Spirits were remnants of something neither dead nor alive, guardians who demand renewal of their covenant each generation. One line seared itself into me. Fear is their sacrament, obedience their harvest. My torch sputtered, and in that flicker I saw Etienne among the monks, his face emptied of terror, eyes alight with surrender, lips mouthing syllables in unison with the rest. For a heartbeat, I thought he reached toward me, but his gesture was not plea. It was invitation. The ground beneath my feet vibrated, as if the bones in the pit shifted of their own will, rearranging into a shape that yearned to rise. A wind spiraled upwards, though we were far below the mountain skin, carrying with it the distinct voices of the men long dead, fathers, brothers, perhaps even mine, whispering my name with tones of warmth and command. I fled then, tearing myself from the cavern, stumbling up the stair as the chant crescendoed, the monks' voices pursuing like hounds through the dark. When I slammed the trap door shut, I felt it throb once beneath my palms as though something had pressed back from the other side, patient and amused. From that night forward, the Abbey's silence was worse than its sound, for I knew now that the order I had joined was but a mask, a thin veil covering a cult as old as the mountain, worshippers not of God, but of terror itself.
I left St. Prune's Abbey before dawn, slipping through the wicket when the porter's stool once again sat empty, my breath fogging in the frozen air, each step down the mule path echoing as if the mountain repeated it back in mockery. Behind me the bell tolled once, then again, a muffled double peal from beneath the earth, and though no monk followed, I felt watched all the way into the valley, the fog trailing like fingers around my shoulders. Days later, in the village, I tried to speak of what I had seen, but the peasants crossed themselves and turned away, muttering that strangers bring curses, that those who name the abbey too often will be claimed by it. In Dijon I sought the bishops here, clutching Raymond's journal page as proof, yet when I unfolded it, the ink had shifted. The words that once spoke of ancestors and sacrifices now bore nothing but scripture in clean, unbroken Latin, as if the heresy had never been. Worse, my own skin bore testimony I could not deny. On my forearms, faint marks bloomed like bruises, curling into the same spirals carved on the stair walls, darkening whenever I heard bells. At night in the city, long after I thought myself safe, letters began to arrive beneath my door, their parchment brittle with the same damp smell of the abbey vaults. Each bore no seal, only my name written in a hand I recognized, Etienne's. One contained only the line, "The fathers keep what they mark." Another carried a charcoal rubbing of bones arranged in circles. Once a folded scrap revealed a blot drawing of my own face, eyes hollow, mouth open in chant. No matter how I burned them, the next morning another appeared. I write this now not to seek belief, for I have learned that those in power will always hide what terrifies them, but to leave a witness, however fragile. Perhaps you hold this page centuries later. Perhaps you read it by lamplight in a room that feels safe. If so, know that safety is only a surface, as thin as the wax that seals these words. Do not think the cult ended with stone walls or vanished monks. Their sacrament is fear, and fear travels well. They demand continuance, and continuance they have, in whispers beneath city churches, in circles scratched into basement floors, in the quiet toll of a bell you swear you heard, though no tower stands nearby. If ever you hear a second peal where only one should be, if ever you see your name written where you did not put it, remember this: the Abbey does not die, it follows. And if, as you read, you feel the paper warm beneath your hand, or your name hum in your skull, then you already belong to them.